All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog 2025, number 36, I believe. So today, remember when I used to put these out on the right day instead of a few hours late? Pepperidge Farm remembers. Yeah, I had D&D tonight. The session went super well. Um, I've mentioned this before. I personally feel like designing combat encounters is not my strong suit. I think I make amazing uh, campaigns, and I think the role playing encounters I have are great. I love making puzzles and things, and I've been able to create puzzles that have challenged my players, and I have some really smart players. So I take pride in that. Exploration, I think I do relatively well. I'm just not that great at combat. However, tonight, uh, I ran basically most of the session was a large combat encounter. And personally, I think it went exceptionally well. I think it's one of the better combat encounters I've designed. And I didn't really, quote unquote, design it. I found a monster um, that I think the monster is actually from Call of the Netherdeep. I might be wrong about that. But anyway, I was looking through because when I create a combat encounter, I first have to find stat blocks, and then I start designing the encounter around it. And man, I have this hair on my glasses, and it's annoying me. All right, so I start by looking for stat blocks, and I already have an idea of how I want the monster to work, and so I start looking for stat blocks that will let me have it work the way I want. And I find this particular stat block that has a special ability that is basically this boss battle is in whatever adventure it's from. It's a multi-part or multi-form boss battle. The boss starts as one thing, and then when you reduce it to 0 hit points, it transforms into another creature. When you reduce that one to 0 hit points, it transforms into another creature. It's a really epic fight. And so I only used the first and the second form of it because the third one would have just TPK'd the party. And after I find the monster, I start thinking up other things like, do I need environmental encounters? What kind of map do I want to use? But this one was designed in a way that it had a lot of different tools at its disposal. Like the first form had this cool AoE effect that it could turn on using 2 legendary actions. So right after one of the players takes a turn, I can turn this thing on, and it's basically anyone that gets within 10 feet of the creature instantly takes damage. There's no save or anything, you just insta take damage. So that's something that's a little bit unique and I thought was interesting and fun. And then the creature itself had a couple different attacks that it could do that allowed it to deal decent amounts of damage, but also to inflict a couple different status effects. So that went okay. It wasn't the most amazing thing in the world, but it worked. And then they were able to take out that form, and then it transforms into its second form. And this one had a teleport it could do. It had a pretty cool melee or ranged attack. It had one legendary action, and this is one of the things that I'm not particularly fond about legendary actions in general, is a lot of times legendary actions just turn into, oh, well, you can use this ability that you already have again. Or you can move. But this one had a legendary action that allowed it to restrain someone at range. It had another one that just let it make another attack, which is still useful. I just don't think all legendary actions should be that. And then it had a third one where you could just pick someone and they and anyone within 10 feet of them just take damage. No save, no nothing. You just get to take damage, but that takes 2 legendary actions. And then its attack, it had a regular attack, and then it did multi-attack. And so it had its regular just attack, and then it also had the ability to teleport. And wherever it teleported to, anyone next to it when it arrived had to make a con save or be blinded. So this particular enemy, and they could, with multi-attack, it could either attack twice, or it could replace one of those attacks with that teleport. And that turned it into a really interesting encounter, because not only did I have a lot of different tools at my disposal to challenge the party, but one of the things that tends to happen a lot in my combat encounters is the players will kind of lock down the creature, and all it gets to do is, will I attack now? Now you attack. Will I attack now? Now you attack. And with that additional teleport, it turned it into a completely different encounter. And it was a lot of fun to run. The players themselves were at full everything. When they started, they just had a long rest, so they had literally everything at their disposal, and it nearly took out half the party. Which to me, and it was supposed to be a tough battle. Like, I don't think that should be like every single combat you're nearly dying, but this is the only combat encounter they're going to have all day. So it should tax them a lot, and it did, and I think the players had fun. I thought it was a really interesting and gig encounter. And it got me to thinking about the video that I made yesterday, talking about how a lot of the new, and this is not a new monster I was running. This is, again, it was from one of the adventures. So it was a custom monster from one of the published adventures. So it's not going to be getting an update or anything like that to 5.5. But it got me to thinking about the video I'd made yesterday, talking about my opinions on the monster manual, and how having these kind of auto, like, if you hit with the attack, you also inflict this condition, makes the monsters that much more interesting. Because a lot of times, you know, with Bardic Inspiration and the right stats, a lot of times you're not really going to have to worry about things like the restrained thing that monster could do, where they could just restrain someone at range. It required a strength save. The one person that really needed to be restrained in the fight was the barbarian, who is currently raging. I don't know if you're aware how barbarians that are raging work, but anything strength based, they do super well. I think she got like a 32. The player got like a 32 on the roll. So it never got to happen, which is perfectly fine. But there is a benefit to having some lesser things that, as long as you hit with the attack, then you get to inflict something. I think it was pretty cool, and it got me thinking yesterday, or maybe it's today, I can't remember which. I actually went and looked at 4th edition monsters, because I still have a remarkably large collection of 4th edition materials, including a compendium that lets me look up a bunch of different stuff. One of the things I can look up is monsters. And so I was looking at various 4th edition monsters, and even like first level monsters. Almost every single one that I found, I think I only found maybe 1 or 2 monsters, and I looked through a bunch of different ones, that all they had as part of their stat block was, I do damage and I can move. Literally every single other one would have something else tricky they could do. Well, they could, make you give combat advantage until the end of their next turn, or they could blind you, or they could move you. Like, every single monster, aside from a few whose entire purpose was to just do lots of damage as fast as possible. Other than those few monsters, every single monster had interesting, unique things that they could do. I found, I think it was a young blue dragon, which was a solo monster. It was another thing that I really loved about 4th edition, is they had different classes of monster. You had standard, which is just regular monsters. You had elite, and elite monsters, when you were balancing encounters, elite monsters technically counted as 2 monsters. And they had enough stuff that they could do that action economy-wise, they acted like 2 monsters on the battlefield. And then they had another class called solo monsters, and they counted as 4 monsters and were designed to be able to be a single monster that fights an entire party of players. That's what solo monsters are. They're called solos. And so this young blue dragon is a solo monster. And it had such a really interesting kit of stuff it could do. Like, it had its breath attack, and it had, a claw attack and that. But it also had the ability as a reaction, which you could do once per turn, which they call it an instant action. You do 1 instant action per turn. And as an instant action, if they got hit, they could make an attack roll against the person that hit them, and I think everyone around them, against their reflex defense or something like that. If they won, the person was knocked prone, and then the dragon could fly up to half its speed without provoking an opportunity to attack. So it meant that even if you were having like melee characters getting up and doing decent damage, it still had a bunch of different options to be able to make the battle more interesting. And it was such a cool encounter to run compared to 5th edition, which really does feel kind of very samey for the most part. They're probably half the monsters in 5th edition. The most dangerous thing about them is they do damage. And having really interesting, unique monsters in 5th edition just really isn't that common. Compared to something else like, I mention this all the time, like in Essence 20, threats are not just, ooh, look, it does damage. Like, unless you're dealing with minion level monsters like putties or something like that, they will just do damage, because that's the only purpose. They're there to make the players use resources. Like, that's the challenge of dealing with putties, is how many resources do I want to spend on this? Whether that's resources of limited use abilities or resources as in my health. But once you get beyond minions, all Essence 20 threats, with a few very, very rare exceptions, will do a lot more than just, oh, I do damage. They will have some alternate attack form. They'll have something they can do that forces the players to react and do something differently. And I think 5th edition, especially after seeing the new monster manual, I think 5th edition has just lost that idea. And they rely so heavily on the DM to create interesting encounters that happen to have monsters in them, as opposed to the monster itself being the interesting part of the encounter. And like I said, this monster that I found on D&D Beyond, because I have like every single D&D book on there. So on D&D Beyond, I was able to find this particular monster while I was just scrolling through challenge rating like 10 or 11 monsters, and I found it and I thought it was really interesting. But it's so rare, unless you get to really, really high level D&D stuff, which isn't supported that well for 5th edition, just in general. You're just not finding interesting monsters. You can create interesting encounters. I'm not saying you can't create interesting encounters in 5th edition, but it requires you to design the entire encounter to be interesting, instead of just, I have a really interesting monster that forces the encounter to be interesting. And that wasn't how it worked in 4th edition. 4th edition, you were kind of required to create interesting encounters, to the point that in the monster manual, and they had, I think, 3 monster manuals, each one, when you're looking through it, it's another thing I'm not particularly fond of the new monster manual, is in the new monster manual, everything is just listed alphabetically. There's no real grouping or anything. For a monster manual, when you would look up a monster, as you're going through it, it would go, okay, well, this is a lizard folk, and It pairs well with these other creatures. So if you wanted to create an encounter against this level party, you could use this monster and this monster. And it would tell you these are good pairings because their different abilities synergize with each other. And it made designing encounters in 4th edition just an absolute joy. It is so much fun to design encounters in 4th edition. And the same can be said to a little bit lesser extent about Essence 20. Designing encounters, combat encounters specifically in Essence 20, can be really, really exciting, especially now that I've got Finster's Monstermatic and I feel more comfortable designing my own threats. It's really, really fun. Or designing combat encounters in the Cypher system is unbelievably fun because the Cypher system has really streamlined and taken out all the excess of combat where every character has a single action. You can move a little bit as part of that single action, but that's it. So those actions can involve movement. Those actions can, like when you're designing monsters, they might have movement included with them. They might have some kind of debuff included in them. They might do some control aspects, but because everything it's a single action system, every character has a single action they can do. It means that you can get really, really creative with what a single action can do. Trying to think of other ones. Fabula Ultima, to be blunt, I did not run enough combat encounters in Fabula Ultima to really get the handle on designing combat encounters in Fabula Ultima. And my one big combat encounter, I completely forgot the most interesting aspect of that encounter that I designed, which is I put a clock in as part of it. And I never used that aspect, and because of that, the combat was not great. But yeah, from just a general tabletop RPG perspective, creating monsters that they themselves require an interesting combat encounter, I think has become a bit of a lost art as far as Dungeons and Dragons is concerned. And it's a little bit upsetting. Like I said, I believe... I'm going to look it up. Before I keep saying, I believe it's this, I believe it's that. No, I'm going to actually go into the encounter, and I'm going to find the darn monster, and I'm going to see what book it's from. It was a really... it was a really fun combat encounter, though, guys. Like, genuinely, I had so much fun. What was it called? There we go. Dragon Ooze Fight. That is what they called it. So, this is from... Yeah, it's from Call of the Netherdeep. It was... I think it's the final boss in Call of the Netherdeep. The monster's called... If any of my players are watching this... This is where I got the monster from. The monster was called Elixion the Tormented. And then when it got to 0 hit points, it transformed into Elixion the Callous. And then it was supposed to do one more transformation into Elixion the Dispossessed. But I only did the 2 because that was enough. But yeah, I reskinned it. Instead of like Elixion the Tormented is this weird multi-armed worm creature thing. And I reskinned it into a giant ooze monster. And then Elixion the Callous is like an angel. And I reskinned it into a beholder with mouths instead of eyes on its eye stalks. So they were mouth stalks. And it was super, super fun. And there's lore reasons why I did that I'm not going to reveal here. But they're just really, really interesting creatures to run. And it wasn't designed by Wizards of the Coast. This is something that was designed by Matt Mercer. I believe he's the one that wrote Call of the Netherdeep. So, yeah, I am fixated on 4th edition. I even went back and found, I have some digital copies of Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine. I only have one Dragon Magazine, but I have quite a few Dungeon Magazine digital copies. And God, we were spoiled so much. Like, Dungeon Magazine came out every month, and in it you had 2 or 3 one-shot adventures that would range from low level all the way up to epic tier. And then you would also have an article, or at least one article that talked about something that is useful to the DM's combat encounter design, or lore exploring, stuff like that. And then on a regular basis, Ed Greenwood would write a Forgotten Realms article that just talked about some aspect of the Forgotten Realms. If you don't know the name, Ed Greenwood is the person that created the Forgotten Realms. He's also the author of the Elminster books. But yeah, I've met the dude. Genuinely, Ed Greenwood is probably one of the coolest, nicest dudes you will ever meet. Like, he just has this like friendly grandpa vibe. He's such a cool dude. And he has a really deep voice too. It always annoys me that everyone that plays Elminster in games is always like, "I'm Elminster, the wizard." And when you listen to actual Ed Greenwood, which Elminster is his self-insert character. Like, Elminster is Ed Greenwood in the Forgotten Realms. You listen to Ed Greenwood, he's got a deep voice like me, and he always talks like this. And he's such an amazing, wonderful storyteller, and this is the way he talks. And he's such a cool dude. But yeah, like, that's what Dungeon Magazine was you would get a couple well-written adventures complete with maps and monsters and everything. And then you'd also get a lot of good information. And Dragon Magazine would have articles about character building. They would have new player options and other, kind of unique, interesting stuff. Like, the one that I still have has the ghost race that you can use if you wanted your character to be a ghost. They had that in 4th edition. Super cool. And tips on how to introduce it to the campaign, how to change a character from a regular race into a ghost race. Like, it was just magically cool. I also found I have like 3 or 4, because in 4th edition, they brought back Dark Sun. It skipped 3rd edition because it was introduced in 2nd edition. Skipped 3rd edition. 4th edition, they had a Dark Sun campaign setting, and they had quite a few. Focuses on it, including I found like 4 Dark Sun one-shots, a couple of which are actually connected story-wise. And now I badly want to run just a Dark Sun 4E one-shot, because damn, they look fun, and I miss 4th edition. So good. So anyway, getting back to the idea of combat. Something I found, teleportation, anything that allows the boss to move for free will create more interesting combat encounters, because it's way too easy to have the boss stuck or get like 3 different opportunity attacks if it tries to move and do something else. So giving them some sort of ability to, especially if you want a single creature to battle multiple, giving the ability to move is really useful. That teleport, it was called Blinding Teleport, was massively useful. And then having different ways to mess with player characters, both near and far. Like, I could blind them, I could do damage from afar, I could trap them in place, things like that. Like, that made a really interesting combat encounter. And especially in 5th edition, where action economy is so important, having a single boss against multiple characters is really hard to balance. And I think this does it just so freaking well. It was fun, and I had fun. I don't know if my players did. If any of my players are watching this, pretend you had fun. I had fun. But it's definitely going to inform me going forward as far as what I can do to create interesting combat encounters, because this is the first time in a really long time that I actually felt like this was a fun interesting combat encounter. And I was able to do a lot with it. So interested to hear from you guys. What do you consider a quote unquote interesting combat encounter? Do you just like, bosses that hit hard and are hard to kill? Do you like ones that require you to think more? Do you like really kind of complex terrains that you get to use, so you can like hide behind walls and stuff to prevent the boss from attacking you? What, in your opinion, makes an interesting combat encounter? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.